Hey, it's Chuck Smoot back again with conversations about BGLOs. Sorry, been away for a while. Just got a little busy with life and work and other stuff. But back here, and we're going to be doing a few more videos to round out the year. So today we're going to talk about the hazing and the pledging problem. That's the big 500-pound gorilla in the room whenever talking about Black Greek organizations. We're going to talk about why does hazing continue, what place does it have, if any, and the overall impact on our organizations and society, and what can we and should we be doing about it. Before we get started, remember to subscribe to the channel. If you like it, hit like. Please share with your friends. And also you can follow me on Twitter at The Rebel Deuce. That's TheRebelDeuce. Again, that is on Twitter. So let's get into it. So hazing, again, that's one of the big things that we have to deal with Black Greek organizations. Anyone who is watching this video knows that hazing is a very real problem with Black Greek letter organizations. Too many people have suffered sometimes permanent damage, or there have been deaths that have occurred all in the name of joining one of our organizations. The hazing and brutality aspect is something that has cast a justifiable negative shadow on our organizations. And in many cases, the hazing incidents that have plagued our organizations have negated some of the other outstanding work that we have done. So let's define what hazing actually is. Now, the Oxford Dictionary says that hazing is the imposition of strenuous, often humiliating tasks as a program or rigorous physical training and initiation. It also says that hazing is humiliating and sometimes dangerous initiation rituals, especially imposed on college students seeking membership into a fraternity or a sorority. So we see that the Oxford Dictionary has really specifically linked hazing with fraternities and sororities. Now, when you look at the laws around the country, the legal definitions become broader, and often, to be honest, they're kind of confusing. And they are not always related to fraternities and sororities. One of the problems is we have a bunch of organizations. We have high school students that are hazing people to get into high school clubs and what have you. And let's not forget some other types of membership-based organizations. There is hazing in the Masonic order. I would be less than genuine if I didn't point out that hazing does occur with the Masons and the Eastern Stars as well. And there's even been allegations with the Elks and other membership-driven organizations that there is hazing. There was the big issue a couple of years ago at Florida A&M where people were hazed as an initiation to being members of the band. So hazing has kind of become ubiquitous in order to join and be a part of something. So let's talk about hazing in a very practical manner. Now, for full disclosure, again, I was initiated in 1987, Theta chapter in Chicago of Alpha Phi Alpha. I was hazed, and I did haze. As rough as I say my pledge period was, there were others that have had it a lot rougher than I did. And consequently, there are those after me who have had it a lot easier. But I don't want to say or pretend that I did not participate. In fact, when I was a neophyte, I was suspended for a hazing infraction. So I have some personal experience with it. I come from a chapter that traditionally had a reputation for hazing. And to the extent, and I don't say this to brag, but I once had a friend who was pledging back in the late 80s, and their whole chapter instructed people not to let me and one of the guys I pledged with, not to let us know that our friend was pledging, because they didn't want us to come up to that chapter and, and wreck shop, or, cause someone to drop line or whatever. But that was the reputation that I had then. Again, I got made in 1987. It is now 2019. As I have mentioned before in other videos, I am now a graduate advisor for the same college chapter that I got initiated in. My views on hazing have dramatically altered. You might even say some people are very surprised to hear me advocate against hazing, knowing what my background is. But the reality is that I see it from a very practical point, not only about what our organizations are about, but the impact that it has on the men and women who are trying to join our organizations. I really don't see how hazing, the way it has manifested in the last few years, how it really has a place in our organizations anymore. Now, I will say, going back to the definitions that I read earlier from the Oxford Dictionary, they make a very interesting point of talking about ritualistic incidents. The reality is, again, I have seen most of the rituals for the Black Greek organizations. So I can say with a fair amount of certainty, brutality, hazing, anything is not written into our rituals. It's not. A lot of the hazing that goes on is not ritual based. What it is people came up with stuff and saying, this would be cool. I think you should have to do this to prove your manhood or prove your womanhood. And that's an issue that we'll get into in a little bit. And so the actual rituals, the actual things that make you a member of these organizations, hazing is not a part of it. The brutality is not a part of it. That is stuff generally that leads up to it, or unfortunately in some cases that come afterwards, the post-pledging stuff. And again, we'll get into that as well. But I do want to mention one thing. Hazing and pledging are two different things. One can exist without the other. I wrote an essay a number of years that's on my personal website, and I will put the link to it in the show, in the description below. But there have been a number of proposals where we can eradicate hazing but still have pledging. I think one thing that is silly among a lot of Black Greek organizations, mine included, is that all of a sudden now we can't even talk. There are organizations, and sometimes mine does the same thing, they don't even want us to talk about pledging. They'll go around start saying the P word. And I think that is ridiculous. I think it's insulting. I'm not going to say the P word when referring to my process of when I pledge. That's absolutely stupid. And removing the word is not going to change what is going on. But what it does is it conflates the issue, and it makes pledging and hazing synonymous. Now, part of it I can understand, because a lot of the hazing happens while one is pledging. But pledging is not inherently about hazing. Unfortunately, it is a vessel where hazing is made possible. But pledging is a way, when you learn the information, when you learn about your line brothers or your line sisters, when you are dedicating yourself to your future endeavors in this organization, you're learning the poems, you're learning the history, you're doing community service, you're really laying the groundwork for, in theory, and I do say in theory because it doesn't always work this way, but in theory, it lays the groundwork for the type of person, type of member you are going to be once you get initiated. Again, unfortunately, a bulk of the hazing happens during the pledge period. And that's really unfortunate. You can have a hazing free pledge period. I've seen it done, and it happened before. When we look at the history of hazing, and there are a lot of people who are far more educated than me on this subject, who have written books and number of articles, scholarly academic articles, detailing the origins and purposes of hazing. And I haven't read all of them, but they do all talk about how hazing developed and how it evolved. From my own personal experience in talking to individuals, I can say that I have encountered people who have said they were never hazed, who were initiated back in the 40s and 50s, and some even in the 60s. Hazing has not always been a part of our organizations. But what I have seen and what I have looked is that over the years, it seems that instances of hazing have increased after the end of each war, particularly after the Vietnam War. And obviously, military historians could probably speak to that better, but there was something about that war and that experience that happened in Vietnam that really raised the intensity level of the hazing. And that's when we really see a lot of people really getting hurt. I mean, there were instances prior to the Vietnam era, even at the beginning of our organization collectively, all of the first 8 organizations, all at one point had their founders and their board of directors address issues of hazing, trying to curtail it, and having founders and other high-ranking members denounce hazing activities as early, from what I've read, as early as 1920. So this is something that has been going on for, well over almost 100 years or so. So we should not pretend that hazing is a new phenomenon, but it was not as widespread as it is now. As a result, I think we have to look at the motivations. Why do people haze? And, I look at my own experience. Why did I haze? And a lot of stuff that I did to other pledges was simply because the stuff was done to me. So if someone was going to come into my frat, they had to go through the same things that I went through, and they had to do the same things that I did. I remember my mother saying something. My mother, who got initiated in 1954, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, told me very early on, and this is a direct quote, but she told me, the only thing you learn from an ass whooping is ass whooping. And she tried to say that you could do better by teaching someone through their head and not their ass. And she was very adamant about that. She knew she saw the after effects of some of my activities, and obviously she was aware when I got suspended from the fraternity. And, she was very disappointed and talked down to me and really, tried to get me to understand how things were different when she pledged, and how things can still be different. And, back then I was a stupid young teenager, so I wasn't paying attention. But as I got older, as I got into my late 20s, early 30s and going on, I started re-examining things. This whole thing of making people earn it, as if physically earning something is a testament of what type of member you will be. the reality is that when we're out doing community service, when we're out working with the community, when we are doing our service projects, when we are sitting up in meetings, doing the work of our organizations, we don't have people outside of our organizations coming up to say, hey, how much did you get your butt beat when you were pledging? Or, how much wood did you take? I mean, that's internal stuff. And we do have a ridiculous litmus test, where we all tell war stories about when we pledge. I tell war stories myself, but I try to tell them in the context of, listen, you need to check out the stupid mess I went through when I was in college. You need to check out the stupid mess I went through when I was pledging. Because I do see it now, a lot of it was stupid. A lot of it was unnecessary. I went through it in some ways, I'm grateful for going through it, but the reality is I don't see it as being purposeful now. And as a graduate advisor, I try to, talk to my guys, and I try to talk to other college brothers about how, yeah, we went through all this stuff, but, none of that made us a better alpha. There's one guy I know who I would honestly say this one, and he is an alpha. Obviously, I'm not going to mention his name, but I never saw someone get brutalized like this guy did. And he was considered this great pledge, and he took all this brutality and he took all this angst, and he was heralded at the time as a great pledge. I have not seen him in a good 25 years. He has not been active in the fraternity since right after he got initiated. Right after, and it's not that he's not one of those people that, my experience pledging was so bad, I don't want to be around you. And there are a number of those people, and they have their justified reasons for that. But he was not one of those. I reconnected with him on Facebook maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. And he's so proud of what he went through, but that's all he talks about. He doesn't talk about the things that are going on now. He doesn't understand the difference and why changes were made. I think what a lot of people need to understand is we are in a different age. We're in a much more litigious society where people are suing organizations at the drop of the hat for all the things that happen. And it has become very trite to say, and has become very repetitive, but a lot of people need to understand, particularly those who are engaging in excessive hazing, is that this stuff puts our organizations at risk. A couple of our organizations, of our Black Greek organizations, are 1 or 2 lawsuits away from extinction. So is beating someone's butt so important that you're willing to risk the longevity of your organization? My organization is coming up on 113 years of being around. I would not want to see that legacy removed because somebody decide to hurt, harm, or kill someone in the name of becoming a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. And I know a bunch of my friends who are in other Black Greek organizations will say the same. The benefits are just not worth it. And somehow we've got to fundamentally change our attitude. So what can we do about it? One of the problems, quite honestly, is when pledging was quote unquote eradicated in 1990 following the death of the young man who was pledging Alpha Phi Alpha at Morehouse College and died during his pledge activities. What the Black Greek organizations did amounted to a Just Say No campaign. There was no, at that time, re-education. It was one day, I think several of our organizations maybe had a 6-8 month moratorium, and it was just say no. And we're in a stage now where, while a lot of brothers are very passionate and very sincere about eradicating hazing, what they're doing is they're beating a dead horse. They're telling people not to haze, but we're not showing people how to bring in new members without the physicality, without the brutality. What we're doing is we're lecturing, and we're trying to make people feel guilty, and we're trying to scare people. We're trying to scare people. Oh, you'll get sued and you'll lose your house and you'll lose your pension and you'll lose, all these other things. And instead of scare tactics, we're not teaching bona fide ways to bring members in without the physical aspect. And there are ways to do it. There are a number of outstanding suggestions and articles and even books that have been written on how to successfully do these programs without the physical aspect. But it seems that we, as Black Greek organizations, we would rather preach people to death. We would rather try to make people feel guilty. We would rather lecture people for 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes instead of really sitting down and having a collective conversation about how to do things differently. And that, as I see it, is the biggest failing of our organizations. I've seen how pledging can be done without physical violence. I've seen how it can be done through without hazing. Most of our organizations have pretty good programs going on now. With Alpha Phi Alpha, ours is called IMDP, Initial Membership Development Process. Some other organizations have what they call MIP programs, Membership Intake Process, where they address and bring in good quality members without hazing. But you still have those who are outside of the fold, or those who are just so stuck in the past that no one has really challenged their thinking on how to do these things without hazing. I am not one of those. There are a lot of people who say, one thing you need to do is stop telling war stories. I disagree with that. I'm going to tell my war stories because they're my stories. And these are things that are important for me. And I learned a lot about myself as a result of those things. But within those war stories, as I said earlier, I recognize the futility and the stupidity. I was about to say stupidness, and that's not a good alpha word to be saying. But I recognize how ridiculous a lot of this stuff was that I went through and that I put other people through. And if I can look at what I did and see that it was wrong, and try to talk to people about what is doing right now, then we have the possibility. We have to talk to people. We have to stop preaching. We have to stop lecturing. And we have to really engage people and fundamentally challenge their notions, not in an adversarial way, but in a way that says we need to do this to preserve the legacy of our organizations. And if we do not do that, if we refuse to do that, if we still think that, because with all the pledging, with all the preaching and the lecturing and the removing of words, not saying pledging, not saying this, not saying that, hazing is still going on. It's still happening. So if we're doing all these things and removing these words and removing this and removing that, and we can blame the individuals for their part in it, but collectively, we as organizations, we are continuing to fail each other without doing practical means and having practical discussions. So as a result, we just need to talk to each other better, more realistically, and show practical examples of how and why we can achieve the same goals, the same outcomes that we want without the physical aspect. It's not easy, but it can be done. I've seen it done. It was done before hazing got crazy, so that means it can be done again. I'm going to wrap that up now. I think I'm going to do a part 2 on this, and may not be the next video, but maybe a video coming up. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them in the comments field, or you can always DM me. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at The Rebel Deuce. Feel free to like or even dislike this video if you like, but if nothing else, share it and have a conversation, and let's see if we can start collectively turning the tide to end what we have that is plaguing our organizations and make sure our organizations are around for another 100, 200 years. I'll see you all next time. Take care.